Before we step into a world of silent vows, unexpected choices, and love that refuses to give up. If you enjoy stories that linger in your heart long after they end, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin. House smelled of sandalwood and old sorrow. I stood at the threshold of the grand hall, wrapped in a borrowed white dress that clung awkwardly to my stiff body. The satin was too tight at the ribs, and every breath I took felt like it fought against an invisible cage. Above me, a massive chandelier cast a dull, golden light over the marble floor, turning everything into a muted painting of a life I didn't recognize. My heart pounded behind my ribs as the clock struck 7. There were no guests, only a handful of silent witnesses, distant acquaintances of my father, people I barely knew. Their faces were gray and impassive, like statues lined up for a ritual none of them cared to understand. They whispered behind lace gloves and silk ties, their eyes hollow, as if mourning something much bigger than a wedding. Maybe they were, mourning me. I tightened my grip on the bouquet, a sparse collection of white lilies and wilting baby's breath. Something crinkled under my fingers. Startled, I glanced down. Tucked between the flowers, half hidden, was an old envelope, its edges yellowed and delicate. Mother's handwriting. My stomach twisted. "Aurora," someone whispered. I turned. It was the officiant, a frail man with thick spectacles and a solemn frown. They're waiting. Waiting. I stepped forward, each heel click on marble echoing like a gunshot. The weight of the gown, the stifling air, the heavy stares. It all blurred into a single, suffocating sensation. I was walking toward my own sentence. Damien Hawthorne stood at the end of the aisle, tall, imposing, carved from ice and shadows. His black suit fit him like armor, crisp and unforgiving, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the cold gleam in his silver-gray eyes. He didn't move when I approached, not even a polite smile, just a nod so slight I almost missed it. We were strangers bound by ink and desperation. I reached the altar. The officiant mumbled the scripted words. I barely heard them. My entire focus tunneled to the paper waiting on the table beside Damien's hand, the marriage contract. Damien signed his name in swift, deliberate strokes. His hand was steady, practiced. Mine trembled when I took the pen. My signature faltered, a wavering line, bleeding across the thick cream paper. As I leaned forward, the bouquet shifted in my arm. The envelope slid free, landing lightly on the table. Nobody else noticed. With a flicker of panic, I covered it with my hand, feeling the worn texture under my palm. "Do you, Aurora Sinclair, take Damien Hawthorne?" The words buzzed in my ears. Didn't lift my eyes. I didn't look at the man who would now own my name, my home, my debts, my future. "I do," I said. My voice cracked like a twig underfoot. A pen tapped against the contract one final time. The officiant sealed it with a heavy stamp. And just like that, the ceremony ended. There were no cheers, no music, only the faint creak of the wind against the old window panes. Damien extended his arm. Mechanical, dutiful. I hesitated, then looped, my hand around the crook of his elbow. His body was rigid under my touch, heat radiating from him like the engine of a machine left running too long. We walked down the aisle together, but there was no confetti, no laughter, no outstretched hands. Just the slow, shuffling footsteps of two people tied together by invisible chains. Outside the main hall, in the dimly lit vestibule, he stopped. Released my arm. "You should read that," Damien said, his voice low and oddly rough. He nodded toward the envelope clutched in my hand. I swallowed. Fingers trembling, I slid the fragile letter from its cover. "My dearest Aurora, if you are reading this, it means you have chosen the path I feared you would have to. Know that sometimes love wears the face of sacrifice. Sometimes honor demands what the heart cannot bear. Trust yourself. Trust him. There are debts deeper than gold, my sweet girl. My knees buckled. I caught myself against the wall, the plaster cool against my bare shoulder. I folded the letter back into the envelope, cradling it like a secret too precious to reveal. When I looked up, Damien was already walking away. His back was straight, his shoulders broad and unyielding. I stood alone in the vestibule, caught between two worlds, the one I had lost and the one I had just been thrust into. The bouquet slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. Followed him into the shadows of Hawthorne House, the letter pressed against my chest like armor, or perhaps like a prayer. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered, "This isn't an ending. It's only the beginning." The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence that wrapped around you like a woolen blanket. No, Hawthorne House breathed a different sort of hush, one that pressed against your ribs and made your lungs forget how to work. The corridors stretched endlessly, lit only by the dim sconces mounted along the walls. Every few feet, a portrait of some Hawthorne ancestor glared down at me, their painted eyes sharp with disapproval. Each frame, thick with guilt and dust, seemed to whisper old judgments into the already heavy air. I hugged my arms around myself as I followed Damien up the wide staircase. Neither of us spoke. His back was rigid, his steps measured. I studied the set of his shoulders, the clipped movement of his arms, the tension that vibrated off him like the low hum of an overstrained wire. When we reached the second floor, he paused at a heavy oak door, swung it open and stepped aside. "This is your room," he said. "Your room, not our room," I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. The bedroom was large, cold, and impersonal. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the windows. The fireplace sat empty and gray with ash. A vase of dead roses drooped on the nightstand, their petals brittle, their stems bent as if exhausted by the effort of living. Damien lingered a moment longer. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared down the hall. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood there, alone. The weight of the day crashed over me, and I collapsed onto the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged under my weight with a pathetic sigh. I buried my face in my hands. A single sob escaped before I managed to choke it back down. The envelope crinkled against my ribs. I pulled it free and stared at it. Mother's handwriting, curling and fragile, stared back at me like a memory too painful to touch. With trembling fingers, I slipped the letter out again and read the words by the weak light of the bedside lamp. Trust yourself. Trust him. I pressed the letter against my chest, closing my eyes. How could I trust a man who hadn't even looked me in the eyes when we married? I set the letter carefully on the nightstand and pulled my legs up onto the bed, curling into myself. The silence of the house seeped into my bones, heavy and cold. A soft knock startled me. I jumped to my feet, heart racing. The door creaked open. Damien stood there, holding a tray, a cup of tea. He didn't speak, just set the tray on the nightstand and backed away. For a heartbeat, he hesitated at the doorway, as if he wanted to say something. But he didn't. He simply nodded, a gesture not of dismissal, but of acknowledgement, and disappeared once more into the dark corridor. I stared at the cup. The steam curled upward, carrying the familiar scent of mint and chamomile. My favorite. Sat back on the bed, cupped the warm mug in both hands, and allowed the tears to come. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, I found the kitchen after getting lost twice in the labyrinthine hallways. It was an enormous space, full of dark wood and heavy stone, but it felt oddly abandoned. There was a pot of tea left on the stove, still warm. Damien wasn't there. I poured myself a cup and stood by the window, watching the mist roll over the barren gardens. The sun barely pierced through the heavy gray clouds. My mother needed her medicine. I tucked the bottle into my pocket and set out to find her room. She was lying in bed, frail and small beneath a mountain of blankets. Her eyes fluttered open when I entered, and a faint smile crossed her lips. "Aurora," she rasped. "I'm here, Mama," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Her skin was dry and paper-thin, but warm. I sat with her, spooning small sips of tea into her mouth, adjusting her pillows, brushing her hair back from her forehead. The familiar routine calmed me, grounded me. When she drifted back to sleep, I sat by her side and stared out the window. The estate stretched endlessly, a sea of stone walls and dying trees. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate Damien. He paused outside the door but didn't enter. For a moment, I thought he might. I thought he might ask after her, or after me. But the footsteps continued, fading down the hall. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. "Trust him," the letter had said. But trust required more than silent gestures and tea trays. Trust required presence, words, actions. Still, a small part of me remembered the warmth of the tea in my hands, the way he had hesitated at the door. Almost, as if he cared. And maybe, just maybe, that was a beginning. The storm arrived. The next evening, rolling in from the east with a low, growling wind that rattled the windows of Hawthorne House. I stood in the library, watching the trees thrash against the darkening sky. The fire in the hearth struggled to keep the chill at bay, casting long, flickering shadows across the towering bookshelves. I needed answers. The letter from my mother sat heavy in my pocket, burning a hole through the thin fabric. Her words haunted me. Trust yourself. Trust him. There are debts deeper than gold. Damien had not spoken to me since the night of our wedding, except for the silent offerings of tea and the occasional stiff nod in the hallways. Our lives brushed against each other like ghosts sharing the same haunted house. Driven by a restless energy I couldn't name, I crossed the room to a low shelf tucked into a forgotten corner. Old ledgers, correspondence, and dusty family albums lined the shelves. My fingers brushed over the spines until I found a leather-bound journal, cracked and worn. I pulled it free and flipped through the pages, the scent of aged paper filling my nose. Letters. Dozens of them, written in a familiar, looping script, my father's handwriting. I sank into a chair by the fire, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. By the light of the struggling flames, I read. Each letter spoke of debts. Not financial, but personal. My father had saved the Hawthorne family once, long ago, during a scandal that could have destroyed them. He had covered for them, paid hush, money, shielded their name in exchange for nothing but a handshake and a promise Damien now honored. Marrying me wasn't an act of love or convenience. It was an act of loyalty, of duty. My hands shook as I turned the last page, a letter addressed directly to me, penned in shaky strokes. If the day comes when you must walk into darkness to uphold the light of our name, do not falter, Aurora. Honor demands a price. Pay it without regret. I folded the letter back into the journal and pressed my forehead against my knees, breathing through the ache clawing at my ribs. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Damien. I wiped my face with my sleeve and stood just as he entered the library. He paused when he saw me, something flickering across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. You found them, he said quietly, nodding toward the journal still clutched in my hands. I didn't answer. He crossed the room, each step measured, until he stood a few feet away. The firelight painted him in shades of bronze and gold, but his eyes remained silver and unreadable. Your father was a good man, Damien said. Better than I ever deserved. You owed him, I said. My voice sounded strange, hollow. So you married me. He didn't flinch. Yes. The admission hit me harder than any denial could have. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the brittle edges of my heart crumbling. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Damien exhaled slowly, the sound rough and tired. "Because I thought it would be easier," he said. "For both of us." I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Easier?" He stepped closer. I backed away. "I know I'm not what you wanted," he said. "I know this life isn't what you dreamed of." I stared at him, at the man who had taken my freedom with one hand and offered me tea with the other. The man who had married me out of duty but brought me my favorite brew without ever asking. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. "What do you want from me, Damien?" I asked, my voice trembling. He was silent for a long time, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Nothing," he said finally. "Only that you don't hate me." Hate him? I should have. Maybe a part of me did. But a larger part, the part that remembered the hesitant knock on my door, the steaming cup of chamomile, the way he lingered just out of reach. That part didn't know how to hate him. It only knew how to ache. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rolling across the sky like a drumbeat of war. Inside, we stood in a fragile truce, the distance between us a chasm and a bridge all at once. Without thinking, I set the journal down and crossed the room until I stood inches from him. I placed my hand flat against his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart beneath my palm. "I don't hate you," I said, barely louder than a breath. Damien closed his eyes. His hand covered mine, warm and steady. For the first time since we met, he looked at me, truly looked at me, as if seeing not the burden, not the duty, but the woman. The fire crackled, the storm howled, and in the eye of it all, we stood still. Two strangers under one roof, two broken souls bound by more than a contract, bound by something older, something deeper, something neither of us dared name. Not yet. The storm had not relented. It battered the house with a primal fury, shaking the windows in their frames and sending rivulets of rain snaking down the glass. I stared at the fireplace in my bedroom, watching the embers struggle against the encroaching cold. The conversation in the library played over and over in my mind. "I don't hate you." The words had escaped before I could stop them, raw and unguarded. And Damien. He had looked at me as if I were something precious, something he hadn't dared hope to hold. But reality crept back in with the howling wind. A marriage born of debt, a duty, not a choice. The ache in my chest deepened. I pressed my forehead against the cold window pane, letting the chill seep into my bones. Footsteps sounded outside my door. A knock. I turned slowly. Damien stood there, his hair damp from the storm, his eyes shadowed and weary. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded, too tired to form words. He entered, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he simply stood there, studying me. "Aurora," he said, voice rough. "I never wanted to trap you." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to hold myself together. "But you did," I whispered. "You tied me to you with chains I didn't even see until it was too late." His jaw tightened. "It was the only way I knew to honor your father's wish." "And what about my wishes?" I snapped, the words slicing the heavy air. "Did anyone ever ask what I wanted?" The fire cracked behind us, throwing our shadows wildly against the walls. Damien took a step closer. "If I could change how this began, I would." "But you can't," I said, voice shaking. "And now we're both trapped." The storm outside grew louder, thunder rumbling deep and long, like the growl of some ancient beast. Damien closed the distance between us. He reached out, but stopped short, his hand hovering in the space between us. "I can't undo the past," he said, "but I can promise you this. I will never force you to stay. If you want to leave, I won't stop you." I stared at him, stunned. Freedom. The very thing I'd thought had been stripped from me. But the thought of leaving, of stepping out into the world alone, filled me not with hope, but with a bone-deep terror. Because somewhere along the way, this cold, lonely house had started to feel like something almost like home. Because somewhere along the way, this cold, stoic man had started to matter. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. "I don't know what I want," I admitted, voice breaking. Damien's hand finally closed the distance, resting lightly on my shoulder. His touch was tentative, almost reverent. "Then stay," he said. "Stay until you do." The vulnerability in his voice unraveled something inside me. I pressed my hand over his, anchoring myself. The thunder cracked overhead, rattling the windows. Without thinking, I leaned into him. His arms came around me, strong and sure, pulling me against the solid warmth of his body. For the first time since my father died, I let myself cry. Damien held me through it all, silent and steady, his chin resting lightly on the crown of my head. When the storm outside finally began to ebb, when the wind softened and the rain turned to a whisper, we stayed there, wrapped in a fragile embrace. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "Aurora," he said, voice low and rough. "I can't promise you a perfect life, but I swear I will never stop trying to deserve you." The sincerity in his eyes undid me. Without thinking, I rose up on my toes and pressed my lips to his. It was a kiss born not of passion, but of shared sorrow, shared hope. He froze for a heartbeat, as if stunned. Then he kissed me back. One hand, cupping the back of my head, the other pressing against the small of my back, anchoring me to him. When we finally broke apart, I rested my forehead against his. "I don't hate you," I whispered again. "And he murmured, "am starting to realize I can't imagine a world without you in it." We stood there, breathing each other in, while the storm outside faded into memory. And for the first time since stepping into Hawthorne House, I didn't feel trapped. I felt chosen. The past still loomed over us, heavy and unyielding. But in that moment, we chose to believe in something more, something worth fighting for. The morning after the storm, the world outside my window gleamed under a brittle, pale sunlight, as if trying too hard to pretend that nothing had been broken. The gardens, once heavy with rain, shimmered like a forgotten dream. I stood there in my robe, holding a cooling cup of tea, feeling the weight of the previous night lingering on my skin like a second, heavier garment. Everything had shifted. And yet, nothing had. The house remained a cavern of silence. The walls, soaked with old secrets and older regrets. Somewhere in its depths, Damien moved too, a presence that felt simultaneously close enough to touch and impossibly distant. A soft knock broke the stillness. I turned, expecting a servant, but it was Damien himself, standing there with a wooden box tucked under his arm. His hair was still damp from a recent shower, a few unruly strands falling over his forehead. He looked, if it was possible, even more undone than last night. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he set the box down on the bed and straightened, rubbing the back of his neck the way a man might after surviving a battle he hadn't meant to fight. "I found something," he said. His voice was rough, low, like gravel scraped over stone. "It was meant for you." I approached slowly, my heart tripping over itself. The box was old, the wood scarred with deep gouges and water stains. A tarnished brass key rested on top, as if waiting for me. My fingers hesitated for a moment before lifting the key and unlocking the latch with a soft click. Inside, Wrapped in a piece of yellowed silk, lay a stack of letters tied with a fraying blue ribbon, and beneath them, a small, velvet-covered book, my mother's diary. My knees nearly gave out. I sat heavily on the bed, the old mattress sagging beneath my weight. Damien stepped back, giving me space, but I could feel his gaze resting on me like a hand that dared not touch. I untied the ribbon, my hands trembling, and pulled free the top letter. My dearest Aurora, it began in my mother's looping script. If you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth. My throat closed. I pressed the letter against my chest for a moment before forcing myself to read on. She spoke of choices made in shadows, of sacrifices offered without expectation of gratitude. She spoke of love, not the sweet, easy love of fairy tales, but the kind that costs you pieces of yourself you never expected to lose. And she spoke of Damien. He is not the man the world sees. He carries burdens no one else would bear. Trust your heart, my sweet girl. It knows the way. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I wiped them away impatiently and set the letter aside, reaching for the diary. The velvet cover was faded to a dull gray, but when I opened it, the pages inside were alive with my mother's voice. She wrote of her fears, her dreams, her fierce, unrelenting love for me and my father. She wrote of the promises made between our family and the Hawthorns, promises paid not with gold, but with loyalty, with silence, with honor. She wrote of the day she knew I would have to bear the burden she could no longer carry. And as I read, a different kind of understanding took root in me. Not the bitter, hard knowledge of betrayal, but the aching, reluctant comprehension of what it meant to love someone enough to let them hate you. I closed the diary carefully and looked up. Damien stood by the fireplace, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders tense. He wasn't watching me. He was staring into the cold ashes as if they held the answers he couldn't find in my face. "Thank you," I said, my voice raw. He turned, and for a moment, the mask he always wore slipped. I saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Fragile and tentative. "I didn't know if you would want it," he said. His fingers flexed at his sides, restless, or if it would just make everything harder. I rose from the bed, clutching the diary to my chest. "It makes everything harder," I admitted, and clearer. Damien's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile, if it hadn't hurt so much to see. "I'm scared," I confessed, because there was no point pretending anymore. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I can." His eyes softened. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and stopped just short of touching me, as if waiting for permission. "So am I," he said simply. The honesty in his voice broke down the last fragile wall inside me. I closed the distance between us, pressing the diary against his chest as if by anchoring myself to him, I could keep from drowning. He caught me gently, his arms folding around my shoulders. I rested my forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Not the frantic drum of passion, but the slow, enduring rhythm of a man who stayed even when it hurt. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing, breathing each other in. Maybe love wasn't grand or loud. Maybe it wasn't built on fireworks and declarations shouted into the rain. Maybe it was this, the quiet gift of choosing each other, again and again, even when it would have been easier to walk away. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of us dared to name. It wasn't peace, exactly. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something steady, fragile, and growing. Mornings began with quiet breakfasts in the sunlit kitchen. Damien would brew the coffee while I buttered slices of toasted bread, the only sounds between us the clink of cutlery and the soft crackle of the radio playing some old jazz tune from a forgotten decade. Sometimes he would hand me a cup without speaking, his fingers brushing mine just long enough to send a ripple down my spine. We spoke little at first. The conversations, when they came, were tentative, stitched together with careful glances and half-finished sentences. But each word built a bridge across the chasm that had once yawned so wide between us. One afternoon, I found myself wandering into the greenhouse tucked behind the main estate. Glass panes streaked with rain and dust arched overhead, letting in dappled light that warmed the loamy air. Inside, rows of forgotten plants drooped and tangled, reaching desperately for attention they hadn't received in years. I knelt beside a patch of struggling roses and brushed away the dead leaves. The scent of damp earth filled my nose, grounding me. For the first time since stepping into Hawthorne House, I didn't feel like a trespasser. I felt like a caretaker. Hours passed without my noticing. When the sun dipped low and my back ached from crouching, I heard the crunch of boots on gravel behind me. I turned to see Damien standing at the threshold, his sleeves rolled up, a rake slung over his shoulder. He looked impossibly human then, stripped of all the armor he usually wore. "You're not supposed to be working," he said, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "I needed to do something real," I said, rising and wiping my dirty hands on my jeans. He crossed the distance between us, dropping the rake with a careless clatter. His hands found my wrists, lifting them gently to inspect the smudges of soil under my nails. "You're a mess," he said. I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. "I don't mind," I said, my voice soft. "It feels good to fix something broken." His gaze held mine, something fierce and unspoken blooming between us. "So do I," he said quietly. We spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning out the greenhouse together. Damien worked in silence, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Part awe, part longing, part disbelief that I was still here. When the sun set and the glass walls glowed gold, he built a small fire in the brick hearth tucked in one corner. We sat side by side on an old bench, sharing a blanket, sipping from a thermos of bitter coffee he had thought to bring. I found myself leaning against his shoulder without thinking. He didn't move away. Instead, he tilted his head until it rested, lightly, against mine. We watched the fire crackle and spit, the flames throwing strange shadows across the misted glass. "You were right," Damien said after a long silence. I shifted to look up at him. About what? About needing to fix things. About needing to do something real. He turned slightly, his arm sliding around my back, pulling me closer. "I've spent so long trying to control everything," he admitted. "Trying to be the man my family needed, the one your father trusted. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to just live." His confession stole the breath from my lungs. "You don't have to carry it all alone," I said. My hand found his where it rested against my hip. I threaded our fingers together, grounding us both. He squeezed gently, as if anchoring himself to that small, shared promise. "I want to learn," he said, "if you'll be patient with me." I pressed my forehead against his jaw, feeling the rough scrape of his evening stubble. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. The fire burned low, casting a soft, golden cocoon around us. Outside, the night crept in, cold and watchful. But inside the greenhouse, in the tiny world we were building with bare hands and hesitant hearts, there was only warmth, only hope. We stayed there until the fire dwindled to embers, wrapped in each other, and the silent, steady beat of a future we were just beginning to believe we deserved. And somewhere deep inside me, the pieces of my broken heart began to knit themselves back together, stitched by kindness, by time, by the simple miracle of being seen and chosen, exactly as I was. 30. Days stretched longer, sweeter. Each morning I woke to find a new world waiting outside my window, one softened by the tentative weaving of trust, stitched together by small, persistent acts of kindness neither of us dared name aloud. Damien and I worked side by side in the greenhouse, in the gardens, even in the long-abandoned east wing of Hawthorne House. We brought rooms back to life, one peeling wall, one dusty chandelier at a time. It wasn't about grand transformations. It was about the act itself, choosing to rebuild something ruined. Choosing each other, silently, over and over again. One evening, after a day spent scrubbing the faded mosaic tiles of the old solarium, Damien found me sitting by the fountain, my bare feet skimming the cool water. The setting sun painted everything in molten gold, blurring the hard edges of the world until it looked almost merciful. He watched me for a long moment, then crossed the courtyard with slow, measured steps. His boots crunched against the gravel, but otherwise the world seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of me, his shadow long and slender across the stones. "Aurora," he said, his voice low, careful. I tilted my head back to look up at him, shielding my eyes against the dying light. There was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Something stripped bare, aching and certain. He knelt down slowly, pressing one knee against the worn stones. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Damien Hawthorne, the man who had faced boardrooms full of sharks and emerged untouched, knelt before me with nothing but raw hope shining in his storm-gray eyes. From the pocket of his jeans, he pulled out a small, familiar object. A delicate silver ring, tarnished by time, but still beautiful. My mother's ring. He held it carefully between two fingers, as if it might dissolve if he gripped it too tightly. "I don't have diamonds or promises of perfection to offer you," he said, voice hoarse. "I only have this, a vow, not made from duty, but from choice." The courtyard spun around me in dizzying, silent circles. "I choose you, Aurora Sinclair," he said. "Every day, every broken, beautiful, stubborn piece of you. Not because I owe it to anyone, not because it was arranged, but because somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, you became the only thing in this world that feels real to me." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my palm against my heart to steady it, but it was no use. It had already broken open, raw and willing. Damien's hand shook slightly as he held the ring up to me. "I'm not asking you to forget the past," he said. "I'm just asking you to build something new with me. Whatever you want it to be, whatever we can make it." A single tear slipped free, trailing down my cheek. I reached out, my fingers closing around his. His hand was rough and warm and trembling. I sank down onto my knees in front of him, the gravel biting into my skin, and cupped his face between my hands. "You fool," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed sobs. "You've already had me. Every stubborn, broken piece, from the moment you knocked on my door with that stupid cup of tea." A laugh broke from his lips, strangled and beautiful. I leaned in and pressed my forehead against his, breathing him in, feeling his heartbeat thrum wild against mine. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "Yes, Damien. Yes to all of it." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. When he kissed me, it wasn't desperate or claiming. It was slow, reverent. A kiss of promises made not with words, but with soul. The sky above us deepened, from gold to indigo, the first stars pricking through the velvet night like shy witnesses. The fountain murmured beside us, the scent of wet stone and blooming jasmine filling the cooling air. We stayed there for a long time, tangled together on the courtyard stones, the old house rising silent and proud around us. No contract bound, us now. No duty, no debt, only a vow spoken not aloud, but in every heartbeat, every breath. I was his. He was mine. And together, we would build a life stitched from the ruins. Not perfect, but real. Real enough to last forever. The house was silent, wrapped in the heavy velvet of night. Only the faint crackle of the fireplace in the master bedroom filled the stillness, casting a flickering amber glow across the wooden floors and the rumpled bed. I stood near the window, barefoot, my fingers nervously twisting the hem of my cotton nightgown. Outside, The gardens lay cloaked in silver mist, the moon a pale guardian overhead. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a wild, steady drum. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I turned. Damien stood there, freshly showered, his hair damp and curling slightly at his temples. He wore only a pair of loose black pants, his bare chest catching the firelight, casting golden shadows across the sculpted planes of his body. His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us crackled with something, old and electric, a pull too ancient to resist. Slowly, Damien crossed the room. Every step he took unraveled me, until I was standing there trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation so sharp it made my breath hitch. When he reached me, he didn't touch me immediately. He simply stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, the deep, steady rise and fall of his chest. His hand rose, slow, deliberate, and he tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His knuckles brushed my cheek. I leaned into the touch instinctively, my eyes fluttering shut. He traced the curve of my jaw with his fingertips, then slid his hand down to my neck, resting lightly against my racing pulse. "You're beautiful," he whispered, voice raw, as if the words hurt to say aloud. I opened my eyes and saw the truth in his face. No mockery, no pity, only awe. My hands, trembling, reached out. I splayed my palms against his chest, feeling the hard, steady thrum of his heart under my touch. He caught my hands gently, pressing them tighter to his skin. Then, with infinite care, he lowered his head and kissed me. The kiss was not rushed. It was slow, deep, and devastating, a claiming and a plea all at once. His lips moved against mine with a patience that stole my breath, as if he wanted to memorize every tremble, every gasp. His hands slid from my wrists to my shoulders, slipping under the thin straps of my nightgown. He pushed them down slowly, brushing his knuckles along the bare skin of my arms, until the gown pooled at my feet in a soft whisper. I stood before him, naked except for the moonlight and the fire's glow. He stepped back half a breath, his eyes devouring me, reverent, aching. Without a word, he lifted me into his arms. I clutched his shoulders, feeling the strength in them, the careful control he wielded not to crush me. He carried me to the bed and laid me down as if I were something precious and breakable. Then he knelt beside me, drinking me in, as if he still couldn't believe I was real. He joined me under the covers, the warmth of his body wrapping around mine, chasing away the last vestiges of doubt and fear. His hands moved slowly, tracing the curve of my waist, the hollow of my hip, the trembling, rise and fall of my belly. Each touch was a question. Each caress waited for permission. I answered by arching into him, by pressing my lips to his neck, tasting the salt of his skin. His mouth found my collarbone, my shoulder, my breast, placing soft, lingering kisses as if leaving a trail of promises across my body. When he entered me, it was with a patience so tender it shattered me. The first brush of him inside me made me gasp, my fingers digging into his back. He stilled, his forehead pressing against mine, his breath ragged. "I've got you," he murmured, voice breaking. "I'll always have you." He moved slowly, giving me time to adjust, to open to him, to lose myself in the overwhelming sensation of being filled, claimed, cherished. Pain gave way to pleasure. Pleasure gave way to a deeper need I hadn't even known I carried. We moved together, finding a rhythm older than memory, the world shrinking down to the heat of our skin, the slide of our bodies, the whispered gasps shared between open mouths. When release came, it rolled through me in great, sweeping waves, carrying my name from his lips as he followed me over the edge. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, our limbs entwined, our breaths slowly falling into sync. The fire crackled softly, the shadows dancing across the ceiling. Damien brushed his fingers through my hair, his touch languid, almost sleepy. I tilted my head to look at him, finding him already watching me with an expression so open, so unguarded it made my chest ache. He cupped my cheek and leaned in, pressing a kiss to my forehead, my nose, my lips. "My wife," he whispered against my mouth. I smiled, a slow, sleepy smile, and tucked myself closer against him. No words were needed. The night spoke for us. The steady beat of his heart against my ear, the warmth of his body sheltering mine, the unbreakable certainty in the way his arms held me. It was a vow stronger than any words could capture. I had been claimed, but more than that, I had been chosen. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to belong. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. It lets me know you're here, sharing these moments too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt journeys about love, family, and finding home. Thank you for spending your time with me today. See you again in the next story.